Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
Here we go. We are spending a good deal of time focused on the plan to get back to school, the vaccine rollout. Will we have to move out of, or can we move out of step 3 on time? But I think the one thing that we can all kind of hang our hats on and been looking forward to, we got an announcement about plans for Ontario Place. Keith Leslie is here. John Wright. I'm Dave Trafford, and this is On the Ledge, the Ontario Politics Podcast. And I know in the past shows, guys, we've all had our own memories of Ontario Place. We've seen the new plan. We've seen the announcements. Keith, I dare say that what's there already and the plan and sort of the approach to all this, we're certainly moving forward, but they have drawn on some of the past, the heritage and the memories that we would all have as young kids who managed to go there, the experiences we had with some of the music and the concerts that were so vital in the 70s and the 80s when the place was really bumping. But there's also an opportunity here to look forward, I think, and I think it just may well be they've nailed it. Now, if they can execute on the plan that they presented, I think it's going to be great.
Well, the artist renderings certainly look great, and of course, artist renderings are designed to do that. But it absolutely does. As you said, it incorporates the pods are still there, the Cinesphere is still there, and they're incorporated in this new, much more glass structures of the new things that are coming in the new amphitheater. It's a great looking concept. It really would be, I think what most people's idea of a modernized, updated 21st century Ontario Place would be after 50 years. So you've got those unique pods and Cinesphere from 50 years ago incorporated into this new design. They're bringing in they've got 3 business partners coming in, this German firm that does a lot of these sort of theme parks and luxury hotel spa type situations. You've got Live Nation coming in, which is obviously going to run the new stage, the concert stage. And then there's another Quebec company that's going to run sort of the Eco Park, which would be outside eco-friendly activities for kids and adults, apparently. It's a great design, is I think what a lot of people want to see. The government makes note. One thing that jumped out at me was it will not include casinos or condos, and the land will not be sold. So that's a pretty clear thing I think people wanted to hear. But one thing that jumped out at me in the news release is Ontario Place will realize its full potential as a long-term economic generator to the people of Ontario. And I don't recall Ontario Place ever being really viewed as an economic generator. It was a great place to go. And I know John, of course, is the man in this podcast with all the history at Ontario Place. And that was sort of the first thing that jumped out at you, wasn't it?
Yeah. And I have to say, I really like the design. And I'm, some people might know from these podcasts, I'm really invested in this place. I spent 3 years as a young scout, Boy Scout, pushing wheelchairs of elderly people. So I spent 3 years walking all of those routes. I then took a year off to do another job, but came back as a late high school and university student for 5 years to be a host in the hosting staff. So I've walked all those buildings, every piece of that land. And I lamented the fact that the Forum, which actually was a bit of a cultural leveler for people. I mean, if you got into the site, and I can't remember how much it was back then. If I said $5, I might be overpriced. But you could go down and see everything from the Charlie Daniels Band to, Ella Fitzgerald to the symphony and even the ballet. And it was just a leveling circumstance. And even if the government lost money, it was kind of the people's place. So I love the design. The question in my mind is, what drives all of this? And I think Keith pointed out a really important line. We'll have time to discuss what the investments are of each one of those players, including the province and including the city. And people will want to know the timelines, and will it be built the same way that we built subways here, where you say it's going to come here and it's going to take 25 years to get there. That's all left there. But the purpose of Ontario Place was to be a showcase and an invitation to Ontarians to go and learn and enjoy. And if the central focus of this is to be an economic generator, then it's going to be dubbed not Ontario Place, but Bud Place, because Budweiser is the central part that's going to attract people there. So I think there's going to be 2 debates. One is the one you would all expect. Where's the money? Show us the money. Where's the taxpayers' money? That's all going to come. But the other one's going to be is when you say it's for the people of Ontario and you say it's an economic generator, what does that mean? Does it, and so that's the heart and soul of the old place. And yes, we get rid of lots of old places that maybe have lived through their tenure. But the new place has to have a heart and soul. And I'm not sure what that heart and soul is, except the line you pointed out, and that is the economic generator for Ontario.
Well, when it first opened, though, I remember thinking it was, for me, the Cinesphere. It was the central attraction, because you went down, and the first movie I saw down there was North of Superior, and had this exceptional IMAX feel to the whole thing. And this was space age stuff, right, in terms of the media. I thought it was kind of cool. They're talking about integrating parts of the Ontario Science Centre exhibits there as well. So we're starting to see one end of the Ontario line to the other end of the Ontario line have that kind of attraction with the new subway line that's coming into Toronto. So I think there's an opportunity almost, John, to take that and get to that innovation feel that we all experienced back in the early 70s around the Cinesphere and Ontario Place. And by integrating some of the attitudes and some of the cool stuff that goes on up in Don Mills at the Ontario Science Centre, and having it exhibited, or its own exhibits at Ontario Place, I think that might be a kind of a neat thread to pull through.
Yeah, and as I said, there's going to be all this other discussions about, the heart and soul and money and all that sort of stuff. But then there's the whole experience part. The one part, and I was there on day one when they opened it, and I remember the Pod 1, each one of them has a name, actually had an exhibit in it. It didn't afterwards. You walked to Pod 2, actually. But each one of those pods were really underutilized. In the first years, they had the film that had been taken over to Osaka, Japan for the expo there and brought back, and it was like, give us a place to stand, and they had it on all kinds of slides. Then the next place was usually a puppet show or something for kids, and then the last place was this incredible, almost boring place, but it was Oscar Peterson's music and a bunch of water falling down and things like that. It was always underutilized. If you can get the Science Center in there, what an incredible boon. If you could get the ROM to sponsor where the restaurant is, or if you could get some other pieces in this that showcase and become entertaining. It's almost, let me just say this. It's almost like, it used to be almost like the museum. If I went to the museum when I was 12 years old and I went when I was 62 years old, I would think nothing had really changed. And we went through all these years at Ontario Place and you thought nothing had really changed except the films in Cinesphere. I think it's critical that they have lots of moving parts, and the pods, it's a great opportunity to get people involved.
And to that end, I think, Keith, that becomes where it is an economic generator. And I know it wasn't stated explicitly in the old days, but let's face it, a lot of people were drawn to the city and drawn to the lakeshore because of Ontario Place. You generate that level of activity for tourists, whether it's a tourist in your own town or from out of the province. That's going to make a big difference, particularly in the coming years, as we make an attempt to stand back the tourism industry back up again. We were, a couple weeks ago talking to Tim Hudak about how you do that. Well, it's making sure that we've got these benchmark events and spots that we can go to, and they're open and they're inviting and they are destinations that we're going to circle and say we need to see it.
And it's also going to be connected to the subway. When the subway and the Ontario line gets there. This is all perfect plan. This is the way it goes. How many kids from how many parts of at least the southern half of Ontario come in by bus once a year for the class trip to the Ontario Science Centre? Well, what if you could add for those kids, most of whom have never been on a subway before, a subway ride down on the Science Centre exhibits at Ontario Place? Very cool, very cost effective. I'm sure they get them, pass rates for the TTC, cost next to nothing, let these kids do it. Open up that whole experience for people. And now all of a sudden, again, as they redevelop Ontario Place, there's more spaces for people and less space for cars, which is also ideal. And you're not going to need it if it's on the transit and it's not just the streetcars, which can be very confusing going in and out of Exhibition Place for a lot of people. Having a subway line coming into there as part of this overall development, and planning right now to have the Ontario Science Centre as part of it, brilliant stuff. I think these are all the right moves. The next step is public input. And of course, that's always fraught with interesting ideas. But I think when people see the basic layout here and the artistic designs of where they're going, there will be, I think, a lot of buy-in from most Torontonians and most Ontarians.
The other thing is the utilization of the park, even in the nighttime. If you look at the Toronto Zoo, they had brought in Terra Lumina, which is a Montreal group, which actually has an incredible experience. You go out there at nighttime, and they have sound portals all over a 1.5 kilometer acreage. They have dry ice, they have lights, they have sound. You walk through these amazing places during the day. You wouldn't even know, not an iota, that actually exists at night. And what they've done is that they've extended it from just being a place where you can see the animals and be part of a zoological thing, but they've turned it into an entertainment complex that goes much longer than you normally would. And I think this platform opens up that kind of thinking, that we can extend the time frame, that we can put new ideas into this sort of place, and that we can really make it something that the next generation will have the same experiences that we had, and say, look, it's a really cool place. It's a great gathering place for people and cultures and everybody.
So this would be probably an historic day in terms of this podcast. If we're the only reason in the last year and a half, it's the first time we haven't led with COVID-19, and that's good news. I think we're starting to talk about things that are out in the light, and we're
But you had to bring it up.
But we're gonna
on a long weekend.
So, talk to Colin DeMello on the radio show this morning. He's the CTV Queen's Park bureau chief, and we got into the whole discussion, Keith, about stepping out of step 3. And I know we in the media want to make, a lot of noise about that. And here are the criteria to make sure we do that. And that, single dose is above 80%. We're already there. Double dose is around 75%, getting there. And 70% of the public health units all have to be at 70%. That is, all of the public health units double vaccinated. So it's a fairly high bar to move out of step 3. But when I step back and I look at it, and I think, you know what? Except that you're going to have more than 15,000 people in the Dome to watch a ball game, I don't know that my life changes a whole lot. I think most people are kind of settling into this, and they're going about their lives, some level of routine. I don't hear a hue and cry to say, get us to step 4 the way we did to step 3.
We're hearing people stepping their own way at this point in the game. You've just recited the reasons why. It's just too confusing at this point. I'm going to step the way I think is safest for me and my family, or whatever level of comfort I'm at. What the rules were, the province is right now, beyond that, is just confusing. What I really want to know is, I'm going to have some sort of vaccine certificate or passport. Maybe is the federal idea, but we're going to need some of this. Is the province going to finally come up with some rules on this, to get some guidance for businesses who are now, they're struggling trying to figure out what to do. No guidance from the province. I think those are the issues right now that the government has to do. People have a right not to be vaccinated, but they also need to know that there will be consequences for not getting vaccinated. Or will there not be consequences? Are we going to keep catering for this 20% that doesn't want to get vaccinated? That's, I think, where most people are at right now. That's where their concerns are. Not about step 3, step 4, step aside. Just let me do my business right now. I'm confused by all that stuff. Businesses want to know, can I fire someone if they refuse to get vaccinated? And the answer is maybe, likely. No one's really sure. They don't want to fire someone over this. No one does. But you have to protect your own workforce. They need some guidance from the province. So as I say, I think that's where we're at. And again, if the case numbers are, climb back above 200 again this week. So there's no, I think, firm facts holding there that people want to go to step 4. As you said, I don't hear any big clamoring there. I think most people are saying, at best, at least we're not Alberta.
Yeah, well, let's get into that in a minute. But just hang on, John. I just want to get your take on this, because it's interesting to hear the conversation shift from what we were all clamoring about, open the economy, now to, I'm going back to work. What are the circumstances going to be? UHN might be the largest hospital in Canada, has set the bar and said, if you're double vaccinated, come to work. If you're not double vaccinated, prepare to be tested, and you'll probably have to end up paying for your own tests. So that might be some incentive. My question is that good for the government, or does it underline a lack of leadership for the folks at Queen's Park?
Well, we live in a society that's run by peace, order, and good government, not the liberty of, whatever you want to do. I was struck by something, Dave, that we released a really great piece of work this week. You can get it off of our website. And it was on the attitudes of Canadians in terms of tourism and the different typologies that we have in the society and what they did before and what they would be willing to do going forward. And on the one hand, you can kind of say, well, except for Albertans, nobody wants to go to the States. And what's driving our decisions is COVID. There's no question about this. And we're having way more staycations and road trips than we've ever had in our life. You look at that and you say, for the tourism folks, if you can take that research and put it overlaid on your business, if you give that kind of experience to them, then they'll stay and they'll spend their money and they'll do that sort of stuff. I looked at the data from the United States, and I got to tell you something. It's like they never skipped a beat. Everything that they did a year ago or 2 years ago or more, going on cruises, going across the country, skydiving, all that stuff, exactly the same. And it's the difference between the two societies. I think what's going to happen in this society is oftentimes governments leave it up to other people to make decisions on their behalf. So we'll see lots of court cases and stuff like that rather than proclamations. But the other thing is that it's going to get to a tipping point where people say, you know what, if you're not vaccinated, you have the consequences. But I want to live my life. And yes, I'm going to get the booster. We see in Israel, they're giving the booster to the prime minister there. But I think there's going to be this really big backlash at some point where people say enough is enough, just like you said, Keith. It's time to open up and get on with things. And if you're not vaccinated, that's tough. The big debate around that's going to be whether you get treated in the same way everywhere than you do with us. So I think we're at that stage. What is it, 80%? Does it become 85%? Does it become 90%? At what stage do we actually say? Put it this way. I'm going to one of the Blue Jay ball games. My daughter went online and got 4 tickets. Can you believe that? We're going to be where 55,000 people have once sat. We're going to be way up. We're going to be 4 of us in a row with no one around us, with the dome open, and we have to wear a mask. Come on, really?
Yeah, no, I hear you.
15,000 people in Downsview Park. So I think there has to be some change.
Well, even on that terms, when we think of the back to school plan that was supposed to be released, tomorrow at the latest, it is being pushed out to the first week of August at the earliest, depending on how we look at this. But Keith, it's almost as if parents and those who are on the front line of all of this, the students themselves, are doing exactly what you've said, and John has just underlined, and that is we're making our own plans here. We're not waiting for the government to come and tell us exactly whether or not my kid's going to go back to class or they're not going to go back to class. It's my full intention of sending the kids into school, and I'm already hearing that narrative. So no matter what Minister Lecce comes up with, there's already going to be a whole cohort of parents and maybe even teachers out there that have said, here's the path that I'm taking when I go to school or take the kids to school. We're taking charge of that on our own right now. We're not waiting.
No, at this point, they're not. Why? If you wanted to have, your 12 to 17-year-old vaccinated before they go back to school, you would have had to start before now, before the government is going to make the announcement of whether because there's not enough time to have 2 shots and all the quarantine time. So families are, having to make that decision themselves at this point. And there's a lot of other decisions that families are going to have to make around this without waiting for this government to announce again that it's going to announce that next week there'll be an announcement about its announcement of a school plan. This government has played 2 regular politics. I've complained about this before with the media about there's going to be an announcement. No, we need to know when your plan's coming and let that plan come out. And parents, I think, have long since given up what this government's going to do. I saw a great Canadian press story this week about daycares and how they've got to wipe everything down every 15 minutes and move all this and wipe all the contact surfaces and all this. But we can't stop the kids from licking each other. So the restrictions that are in place in daycares and high schools and all that, everything's going to have to be revisited here in a much more common sense. So this government, if it's going to have a plan that's been so billboarded and so built up, it better be clear and it better be concise and it better have the teaching and educational staff on board, or it's just going to be a fiasco.
But I'm going to push back on a couple of things, and that is that if you are a parent of a 12-year-old over the age of 12, you could have had for months now a COVID shot for your kid. So you know what? To hell with you. Stay out of school. I don't care if you missed the deadline. You've had your chance. I mean, these are parents who are supposed to take responsibility for their kids, and they shouldn't penalize everybody else for what they're doing. Secondly, there were close to 800 to 1,000 kids between the ages of 10 and 19 who were COVID positive in the last couple of weeks in this province. So it is going around, and the variant can be brought home, and other people can be infected from it. So I don't mind the government laying down some rules. I mean, we have huge clinics where you can just walk in, and it's like listening to, the theme from, some movie in the background with an empty theater. It's just, you can go and get it anytime you want. So I think the consequence of not doing certain things has to be met with, resistance. And you got to say, you know what, if you didn't make the deadline for the health of your own kid, too bad. Like, that's not the government's fault. It's the parents for not taking the lead.
Yeah, and on the one hand, I think it was important that Dr. Moore came out and said that we were going to have this plan around vaccinations and what to expect if kids were vaccinated, double or not, and, the activities that they can play. To John's point, though, Keith, I think some people had to hear that before they were going, oh, geez, I better get going here. If they missed the first week of the badminton team tryouts, then, might be able to push that out a week. But at the same time, I think, making the announcement on the final day to say, today's the last day you can possibly get fully vaccinated before getting back to school, might have been a misstep. That might have been more helpful to have made that announcement at least a week earlier.
For a government that has been making vaccines a priority for at least 2-3 months now, a solid number one priority, to not have communicated that in a much clearer way was really, again, is just part of this lack of leadership, which is on this issue, which is just ridiculous. And the premier is being, I think, ideological about this. It wants nothing to do with violating someone's constitutional rights when it comes to the vaccine or vaccine passports or certificates. He doesn't care about your constitutional rights in some other areas. He'll override those for, at the drop of a hat if he has to. But the government here, the miscommunications on this is just stunning. One thing that caught me this week was a report that came out on the surgery backlogs. The health minister was talking about it, because of the COVID. And apparently it did not really grow, that there's still 200,000 people or so, and they're throwing a ton of money at it to try and, the knees and hips, those sorts of operations that needs to be done in the cataracts. They're throwing a ton of money at it. But how is it that we could have canceled so many elective surgeries and we come out and the waiting list has not grown from about, the surgical backlog of about 200,000 people? I don't understand that.
But even spending $324 million is relatively a drop in the bucket. It's only about 25% of what they say they're going to need to deal with this backlog. It's going to take, John, 3 years.
Yeah, it may well, Dave. But I mean, if the budget officer says we saved billions and billions of dollars while the pandemic was on, maybe they can throw some of the money at that. Look, I'm still down in the weeds. Oftentimes, the Ministry of Health is a place where good ideas go to die. It's also a place where the bureaucrats can really tie you up in quicksand. So here's what government and other leaders are saying, and the reality. They're saying, if you want to go to work and you're not vaccinated, then you're going to go and have to get a test every couple of days to do that sort of thing. We're sitting on millions of tests. The premier called for them to be released. We could be using them in school systems. We could be using them everywhere else. I mean, we've bought them. The people have bought them. But as I said on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, I mean, if you want to get a rapid test done in this city, the minimum you're going to pay is $184 for a 12-hour turnaround. So what does that say to the rest of the province, where you can make these proclamations or suggestions or demands, whatever you want, and yet your own health ministry is basically said to the premier of the province, who has said time and time again, I want this? The answer is no. You get out of Halifax, you can get it for free, basically on a street corner, right, Keith? I mean, you can go there and get it anytime, and look what it's done. It's helped them keep everything low. But this is where I kind of disconnect, where we do everything that the health department does, but then, and I don't want to be like Alberta, where the masks come off and everything's open season. But there seems to be a disconnect between when the health department wants to do something and all the doctors, and when the politicians want to do something else. And I think, again, we're now starting to open up, and we're going to get into this dynamic where people say, enough is enough, let's just live. And if we need to get something that you're telling us we should get, put it on my OHIP card and give it to me right now.
Yeah, and I think the extent to which we begin to look at that, and let's go to Alberta. Maybe we can just finish on this note, because a lot of heads exploding as we hear the reports coming out of Alberta suggesting that they are going to do away with mandatory quarantine even when you test positive. But, just to be devil's advocate on this, Keith, I think at some level we have to stop looking at just the raw numbers in terms of case numbers. We're going to have to start to look at the effects of the new cases. Are people asymptomatic? Are they symptomatic? Those are the numbers that we're going to have to deal with. Are these people vaccinated, the ones who contract the new cases? I think those are more important numbers. So Alberta is actually going to where we all want to be, a place where we don't have to have quarantine, even if we come in contact with somebody who has had it or we test positive, to the point where we're understanding better the efficacy of the vaccines, how it's affecting us. If we do contract it, is it as serious, et cetera. But their vaccine rates considerably lower than we are here in Ontario. But the real wrinkle for me is this was coming from their chief medical officer of health. She is on the front line saying, we're okay to do this.
Well, I guess that's it. You're right. Everyone wants to be where Alberta's going to go, or is going, I guess, effective now. And to see Jason Kenney, I guess he, as you say, does have the backing of their chief medical officer of health, but to see him declare that the pandemic is now an endemic and, something we have to learn to live with and move on, seems a bit early to me and a bit political on his part and way, way, way too early for most Canadians, I think. Yeah, and I think that's why we're seeing the backlash so far, that just seems to be a bit too early, too soon, especially with the case numbers going, the variant. And as you say, the vaccination rate in Alberta, well below, I think it's like at 2/3 at best, 65% or so, as opposed to Ontario's 80%. So those numbers do not bode well. Calgary's already had one substantial outbreak. They've just gone through the Stampede and numbers are going up again. So this just seems, as did even the Stampede itself, that Alberta was just thumbing its nose at the rest of Canada and prepared to go its own way. But that's kind of the Alberta way about things too. It's kind of sad to see in the middle of a pandemic, though.
Yeah, but again, let's go back to this. I mean, Dr. Staney Brown was publicly quoted in the last 24 hours in saying, if we get an uptick in cases in the fall and get a fourth wave underway, then we're going to have more restrictions in Ontario, and we're going to go back and take a look at stuff. And I look and say to him, if we have 80% of the people who are vaccinated, then the outbreaks are going to be amongst the other 20%. And and you can make all the arguments you want that it's going to clog hospitals and stuff like that. But I've done my job. I mean, I can statistically say right now that if you're double jabbed, you're not in the hospital. I mean, you've taken 2 Tylenol and you spent 3 days at home. That's basically what's happening. And you're able to go back. But we're going to have to come to a case in point at some point. We're going to have to say, you know what? The Premier has talked about making sure that there's not 2 classes of citizens in this province. Well, there are going to be 2 classes of citizens. You're going to be those who are out of hospital and those who are in hospital. And at some point, you're going to have to basically say, we are better than Alberta, and therefore we deserve the reward to get on with our lives. So, we're going to come back to the 20% or more who aren't vaccinated, and we're going to look at them and say, give me your card at the door that says whether you are or not. And if you're not, good luck.
Well, let's leave it there and get out and enjoy this long holiday weekend in Ontario. Is it a civic holiday in Nova Scotia, Keith?
Absolutely. It's a good long weekend for everyone.
That'll do it for us. That is Keith Leslie, John Wright. I'm Dave Trafford. This is On the Ledge, the Ontario Politics Podcast. It's an eye contact podcast.